Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. Today's guest setlist curator is Rick Monture. Rick is the director of the Indigenous Studies Program at McMaster University, where he also teaches in the Department of English and Cultural Studies. Rick is a member of the Mohawk Nation, Turtle Clan, from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. Rick is also the author of We Share Our Matters, 2 centuries of writing resistance at 6 nations of the Grand River, which maps the intellectual traditions and ongoing sovereignty of the Haudenosaunee people. Rick holds a PhD in English from McMaster, is a past Fulbright scholar, and has long served on the boards of cultural and educational institutions at 6 nations. He's also a longtime Grateful Dead taper and a member of the Grateful Dead Studies Association. Welcome, Rick.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody. Thanks. Good to be here in my basement.
All right, here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year the performance is from. Contestants who are all in a video conference together can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Whoever is furthest from the correct year is eliminated. The last 2 Deadheads standing will hear 3 tracks, and whoever is closest to the correct years in aggregate wins. We've got a returning champ Scott here with us, and we'll meet the rest of the Deadheads in a moment, but first, without further ado, the Grateful Dead. It was playing in the band at Richmond Coliseum in Richmond, Virginia on October 6th, 1984. The taper was Doug Oed. Rick, a taper starting out with a tape. I'm not shocked. Can you tell us about that one?
I chose that for a few reasons. That's when I got into the Dead, was that tour. I saw Syracuse, my first show of that tour. And had some local guys who were tapers who dropped out of university that year to tape that tour. So I was able to get access to first gens really quickly. That's actually the first tape I ever got, the first box of 10 I ever got. And it's always been kind of special to me for that reason, because that was sort of the sound of when I was first getting into the Dead. And, I was listening to it and I thought, because I didn't know that much about them live anyway. And I thought, wow, is it always sound like this? And sadly or not, it didn't. The fall of '84, if folks are aware, it's a particular chapter in the band's history and Jerry's personal life and stuff. So some people have a real problem with the early or mid '80s, the dirty '80s. Some people refer to it as. But I always found that some of the most really reckless, amazing, beautiful, dark, all of those things that the Grateful Dead kind of embody. And you think of the times, right? The '80s, what was going on culturally and musically? Michael Jackson, early Madonna, early sort of post-punk, REM, that kind of stuff. That's what I was listening to at that time. So it was really kind of a unique time. And I guess I've always been really drawn to that. In that particular jam, there's a lot of that going on. If anyone knows that show, apparently Jerry was having equipment troubles and he's sort of on and off stage. And so Bob was picking up a lot of the slack. After that, that playing drops into a really, really beautiful China doll. and then into drums and into space and back into another jam. I think Jerry left the stage at some point, comes back for throwing stones, and on they go. But there was just a lot going on. And my friends who were eyewitnesses to most of those shows that tour, I still see them on a fairly regular basis. And every time we get together, I'm always asking them questions because they were at Augusta, some of my favorite shows. Like, what was it like? What happened? What was the scene like? All that kind of stuff that us deadheads sort of thrive on. Anyway, that's why I chose that. It seems to throw people off because there's so much going on. Really discordant jams, these sort of slow builds, big builds, a lot of bob, a lot of noise, really.
So when you started taping, there's no YouTube back then. How did you learn the fundamentals of taping?
Oh wow. Trial and error, what I could sort of pick up. Like I said, I'm from Southern Ontario, about an hour south of Toronto, hour outside of Buffalo, and it's not it's rural, but it's you know it's not urban either. There's not a whole lot of manuals back then, especially. So I'm trying to think now. Like I knew after my first show, I knew there was taping allowed. Oh, I also bought people are familiar with the Book of the Deadheads. I think came out in '85. The Paul Grushkin or something, and there are pictures, right? You see pictures of guys taping. It's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then when I went to the show, I could see people taping. So I didn't really know the culture that well. My first show. Um, so at the time, I was in college for a radio and television programmer and thought I'd be going into radio or film sound or something. So I was a bit of a techie back then, as far as one could be a techie in the early '80s, mid '80s, analog stuff. But I was always drawn to that. So I guess those things sort of worked in my brain and was interested enough to want to do that. And I did want to do it early on. Like I began taping in '87, '88 a little bit, and then from '88 on, yeah, from summer of '88 right through to the very end, summer of '94, taped over 120 shows or something. Um, Maybe not the coolest thing to do in the Grateful Dead concert, but I found lots of enjoyment in there and a little community within that big community. And it's a kind of an isolated thing because oftentimes your friends would be off having their fun, sitting all together or roaming the halls or whatever they were doing. And we were kind of sequestered behind the soundboard. By the time I got into the game, the taping section was well established. So we're always packed in behind the soundboard. The sight lines weren't the best. Luckily, I'm really tall, so I'm able to see over top of everybody at the board mostly. And there wasn't a lot to see on stage anyway, right? Let's be honest. They weren't the most photogenic band or anything. Not a lot going on up there, but the light show was amazing and the sound was great there. So it was a comfortable spot. You weren't getting hassled. Security let us alone. People weren't jostling, trying to take your seat. It was just a little bit cramped, but it was home. We found our little family.
Thank you, Rick. So the closest was Adam, who guessed 1987. Adam is 41 from Brooklyn. You're on to the next round, Adam. Why 87?
So heard a little bit of a bigger room and was keyed into Brent's keys. Heard a little bit of the Twinkly keys I thought was a little later, but then I was second guessing myself and thought a little earlier 80s. So I sort of split the difference and went with the earlier of the later 80s in order to hedge. So I played the game there.
Way to go, Adam. You are on to the next round on a very tough playing in the band, as is Cory. Cory is 28 from San Diego. Cory, you guessed 1980, so you're 4 years off. Why 1980?
In retrospect, I should have played the game and gone later because I thought it was the first half of the 80s. Yeah, I thought Brent's keys were earlier, which is funny because Adam heard them and thought they were later. Yeah. That's all I
Hey, it
thought.
worked. You're on to the next round. Way to go. As is Matt, who guessed 89. Our returning champ Scott guessed 1990. Matt is 54 from Kansas City. Why 89?
Well, I thought it sounded like a loud room and, just a big show. I thought Brent's keys sounded later. So I just kind of went with that. I should have played the game like Adam.
So Scott, our returning champ, is 51 from Glen Falls, New York. Scott, you guessed 1990. Hard luck, only 1 year off the pace. Why 90?
Apparently, I was playing a different game than everyone else. So it's funny. At one point, I thought I heard Vince early on, and then I'm like, wait, that's not Vince. So then my game was like, okay, now I'm straddling the Brent Vince era. And it did sound that I think I'm used to a different sound from mid 80s, and it does leave me with wanting to explore some more mid 80s audience recordings, if anything. So that's a plus.
Scott, you're forever a guest of the year champ, and you got the
Nice.
T-shirt to prove it. Thank you very much for coming back on, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Matt, Cory, and Adam are on in the next round. Rick's got another great pick. Good Lord. That was Truckin' at Broome County Arena in Binghamton, New York on May 9th, 1979. And the taper was Kathy Sublet. Rick, a screaming Truckin' there.
Yeah, I came across this. I can't remember where I heard about this. Truckin' is like a really hot version of Truckin', obviously is. So that was the second time they played Broome County Arena. They played there again in '83. And that was the start of the Not Fade Away chant, the Binghamton show in '83. That's where that kind of all began, like through the last song into the encore, if people know that bit of trivia. Anyway, for '79, it's like, was Brent's fifth show or something, like the first week of his touring days with the Dead anyway. And from all accounts, you go on Internet Archive and reviews, people who were there. I think the air conditioning broke down or something. It was a hot day in May, and it was just wild. Lots of things floating around the crowd. And that's a really great, that's a front of board audience tape, right? That's the difference. That's why it seems so, you're right there. You can hear people whooping and hollering and clapping along. And just a lot going on. And Kathy Sublet, female taper, not a whole lot of women were taping. Her and Joni Walker, the two kind of more famous ones. And Betty Cantor, the most famous one of all, my favorite. So yeah, just a a really, really good capture of that time. And there's other versions too. I think they opened that show with like a 20-minute sugaree in the like opened the first set with it. So it's check it out sometime. There's a good China Rider in there. It's just a smoker.
Thanks, Rick. Matt and Adam both guessed 85, so they're on the finals, and Cory guessed 89. Matt, 85.
Oh man, I was playing the game on that one because I just had no clue. I knew it was the '80s and just went straight for the middle of it. Or it wasn't even the '80s. So I heard Brent and just went right for the middle.
Adam, you also guessed 85.
I actually heard what I thought sounded like 70s Jerry tone. And then I heard the B3 screaming in there. And I was like, oh, B3 is hard because, sometimes you think of prominent B3 as the later 80s, but it's actually kind of there the whole time. So I thought mid 80s. I thought Rick was going to go with, like maybe the first show he taped or something at 85. So I was playing the game a little bit there. But on retrospect, the '70s guitar sound with the Brent organ would have 79 made sense. But I guess I was playing the game a little bit and always hard with context clues on the B3.
And playing the curator. Smart. Cory, 89.
Oh man. I convinced myself it was 89 or 90. I think just because Jerry and Brent sounded really connected and Jerry sounded really healthy. And I think Brent was really loud, so maybe it should have tipped me off that it was early, Brent, because he was very loud. But, if you get in it's like there's like a psychological guess the year syndrome happening. Yeah.
He not only sounded loud, he sounded confident. And that is not something I would associate with 79. So that's a really tricky one. Cory, how did you get into the Grateful Dead?
My parents started seeing the Dead in 84 and 85. Probably right around the time and probably a similar area as you, Rick. And yeah, I just grew up hearing a lot of Dead, they saw a lot of shows and a lot of JGB shows too. And we grew up hearing the Dead but when I graduated college, my dad gave me all his tapes. That was my college graduation gift from him was all his tapes. And that's when I always liked the Dead because my parents I had, because whatever, I like the Dead because the Dead are good. But there's like a line you cross, and I think I had never had my own a personal experience, like an experience that was unique and personal to me with the Dead. And I think that when I got those tapes, started listening to those tapes, that happened for me. And, you know, you go down the rabbit hole.
Did listening to your parents' tapes uh, make you closer to your parents?
Yeah. I mean, it's like the Dead is like probably top 5 topics we talk about. And we're close, but, you know, it's we kind of joke about it in my family. Like they love my sister and I, but when they talk about the happiest times in their lives and in their marriage, it's like that period. They moved to the Bay Area in 92, and saw tons of shows, 92 to 95 in the Bay Area. And that was the happiest it sounds like they ever were. The Dead is like, for them, if I'm connected to that, then I'm connected to them in a way that I wouldn't be, otherwise. Which, like, what other band brings that? You know what I mean?
That's cool of your parents to admit that to you, and cool of you that they knew that you would understand. I see a surfboard behind you. Are you a surfer?
I'm in San Diego. I'm embarrassed by the situation in this room. This is the surfboard room, and just like there's a computer in here also. And yeah,
So there's like 7 surfboards in there. It seems.
there's
Um,
17
sorry.
surfboards in this room, right?
Is there any connection in your mind to like the ethos of surfing and the ethos in the Grateful Dead?
Like everything. I mean, Jerry's ethos on life, like totally it applies to everything. I think it applies to surfing though. Like be humble, humility, and then and not being a jerk, and not being pretentious. Like, I love that about the Dead, and I try to take that with me in everything I do and everywhere I go, but definitely surfing, 'cause, like, it's like a sport, but then there's all these other entanglements, like emotional attachments and things that go along with it. So, I think there is a connection there.
Cory, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, it seems like you have really cool parents, and not just because they listen to the Dead, but because they seem like cool people.
They are. They are. I love them. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, Cory. So Matt and Adam are going to hear 3 tracks from Rick, and whoever is the least number of years off over the 3 tracks wins. Rick has more tracks as backup if need be. Let's hear the first track of the finals. That was the other one. At War Memorial in Rochester, New York on November 8th, 1985. The taper was Doug Lamar. Rick.
We talked about the fall of '84, it being sort of dark, and Jerry was in the best of health. And the next year, '85, that was their 20th anniversary. They seemed to be playing happy. He'd gotten busted earlier that year, right, and sort of cleaned up a bit, and yeah, it was a good year, and they were just sort of really energetic and bouncy and happy almost, you'd want to say. You see that in the Grateful Dead, right? They'd ebb and flow, and kind of as what was going on with them or whatever shenanigans they were up to in their personal life. But certain years or tours have that kind of feel. And '85, to me, I saw a bunch on, well, not a whole lot, but several on that year. And looking back, that's what it always seemed to me. There was a kind of joyousness. And, if those who saw the band back then, still off the radar though, right? 83, 84, 85, they were touring a lot, playing around a lot of places upstate New York, and but not a lot of attention. Nobody's paying attention to them mainstream. So when you're in a little Grateful Dead land, the cities didn't know what hit them. The Deadheads did, but their local populations didn't. It was a kind of a fun place to be. That show is also remarkable because that's the show I didn't make. I went there without tickets, tried really hard to get tickets to both nights in Rochester, struck out. So I knew they were getting popular then. Went to the shows, got in the first night, bought a ticket off the street. And then kind of that night, it was really, really crowded, and people were talking, these are counterfeit tickets that some guys were hawking, right? They looked real. They were on Ticketmaster stock. Anyway, got in, and it was probably a counterfeit ticket. The next night, the night we just played, I got busted at the gate. Or I got through, and then my friend who I was with, she got held up because she had a counterfeit ticket. And by then, the security guards knew that. So they were looking for serial numbers on the back of these tickets, and some didn't care. And like any kind of concert, right? Some are more lax than others. But I couldn't leave my friend behind. Other people were saying, just go, like behind me. I couldn't do that. So went back and got her, and we spent the night outside. But anyway, that's the show I wasn't at, unfortunately. And they were playing rather short. If I recall, both first sets of the first and second night fit on a 90-minute tape. So 45-minute first sets, both nights, 90 minutes easy for the second set, but no one really complained. They were short, but really well played, really a lot of fun. And yeah, so that's what I, kind of remember about that show. The show I never got into, but it did motivate me to make sure I never got shut out again, because it's the worst feeling in the world. So I paid strict attention to the mail order instructions, and always got tickets, never got shut out after that time, 100 and several shows later. Oh, and I had a close encounter with Weir that night too, because if the War Memorials are right downtown Rochester, there's really no parking lot. It's just sort of intersected by city streets. And so we just happened to be walking around outside before the show, and there's a little backstage area that comes in off of Main Street. So everybody would have to come in through, like, just down the street. And so there's a crowd of us in the backstage area, we weren't hanging around waiting for the band, just doing what deadheads do before a show. And this old beat up Camaro starts pulling in, and people are like, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby. And he was like 5 or 6 feet away from me, sitting in the passenger seat of this little rusty Camaro pulling into the backstage area. So that was my close encounter with Bob Weir. Never got closer than that. As he was getting chauffeured in by somebody. I don't know. It was, looking back on it, it seems kind of bizarre now. No limo, no anything. But this is 1985. They were different days,
What is your criteria for a good tape?
Somebody tonight said you can sort of hear the room. Sounds like a big room, right? If you really pay attention, and archive or re-listen is good for this. You can just sort of look in the taper's notes. Generally, the taper section officially began in the fall of '84 after the East Coast tour. So that Richmond show I played you, that was the last tour where you could tape anywhere, basically. And so a lot of the guys back then were going for what they call front of the board, FOB. You'll see that. That's what that stands for, front of board. So, and that was back in the old days. They used to kind of hide, but by this time, people were bringing their mics in. It wasn't a big deal. They were kind of letting it go. There's that famous moment where Healy said it was a nuisance, right? You couldn't see the stage anymore. Too many mic stands in the way, that kind of thing. And after that moment, that's when everything moved behind the board. But before that, you could set up pretty much anywhere. And so the mics of choice in that era, were Sennheisers, 441s or 421s. You can look for that. Front of board, anywhere between, anywhere up to 85, 84, 85. They generally capture a sound, the room, really, really well, because they're more omnidirectional. They'll capture more ambient noise of a hall, of an arena, whatever. Later on, when they started up the section, you're further back, so most guys are using shotgun mics, which are more directional. They're designed to sort of, for movie sets, to pick up sounds far away, but they lose something in terms of the ambiance, just to capture more sound. So it's a trade-off, right? So that's kind of what the differences are. So anyway, good tape. You got to, it's easy now with archive. You can just sort of, if you got time, cast around. And I always tell people, if you have a good system, if you're fortunate enough to have a space where you can really listen to something loud on good speakers, do that, because so many people have Bluetooth speakers now, and it just doesn't do the same thing, right? You don't feel the fullness of something. I like analog as much as possible, but anyway, so a good tape will capture a room, and some of those arenas had specific sounds. This Philly Spectrum stands out as a place that had its own kind of sound. Hartford Civic Center had its own sound. Madison Square Garden, of course, and the smaller arenas. So I like that, where you can kind of hear something. You hear the room. And, you go on Reddit or these other places, and people, younger people are asking, what was it like to be at a Grateful Dead show? And I always thought, if you could get yourself a good tape or a digital copy or archive or whatever, and crank it on those speakers or headphones to capture that sound, that feel of a room, of an audience, of the band, that's what it was like. Because at the end of the day, it's that music, right? Lots of other things happen along the way. The fun you had with your friends getting there, the hijinks you got up to in the parking lot, and run-ins with locals or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you're there for the show, there for that experience, there for that sound. And I think that's what drew me to taping too, because it captures that moment, right? For better, for worse, but often for better. And so that's kind of what you're looking for. So I guess a good tape would do that. It captures the feel of the room of the night, like that trucking, right? You could just hear the crowd, explode and that big buildup, and that's what it was like. You can kind of feel the energy, hear the room.
Was it comforting socially to have a role at the show? You have a job to do?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's funny that there were some times I'd say that it was like going to work. We I guess maybe if anything, some tapers sort of felt that we were doing, we were making this bigger sacrifice. We went to greater expense than other people, right? To buy your gear, to take the time out, to get special tickets, to line up early, all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, it was its own kind of ethos, and like any situation, any community of people, there were jerks within that crowd, but also mostly really, really cool guys, really cool people to hang out with, because we were there for a common purpose. We had a common interest. And like I said earlier, most of us were stuck there kind of by ourselves or with each other while the rest of our friends were off, having fun. Yeah, it had a sense of purpose, sure. But like I said, mostly fun. If it wasn't fun, I wouldn't have done it. Because that's what people would say. It's like, how much fun can you really have sitting there cramped there? You can't move, you can't dance, you got to be quiet, you can't clap, all that kind of thing. Well, that part of it was fun for us, for those people who thought that way about taping at shows. And I did. Like there came a time, and that's what we sort of joke with my friend John, my taping buddy from Long Island. So I wouldn't know what to do anymore. Like if I actually had a ticket and couldn't tape, I wouldn't know how to behave out there, like up in the stands, sitting in my seat. Well, what would I do? Would I dance? I'd probably be a really lousy dancer at this point because I'm so used to just standing there, sitting there. So, but yeah, it was fun.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, it was that 85 other one, and Adam guessed 81. He was closer. Matt guessed 78. So Adam, 81. No mercy with the 80s right now. Adam, tell us about your 81 guess.
Heard Brand, but wasn't super able to articulate what keyboard sounds it was. And I just heard Jerry was just on point, and it was very energetic. So it just kind of reminded me of an early 80s other one. I hadn't heard too many like mid 80s other ones that had that pop, I guess. And so kind of keyed into Jerry's guitar playing and was like, this sounds like a early 80s. So close enough, I guess.
Yeah. You go up by 3. Matt, 78.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just kind of lost there. I didn't know if I heard Brent or if I heard Keith, or if I wanted to hear, in my mind wanted to hear Keith in the 70s or what. But yeah, I just kind of dug myself a little bit of a hole there.
2 more songs. Matt, how'd you get into the Dead?
In high school, I was listening to hard rock, like Motley Crue and Rat and Def Leppard. Those were like the first shows I went to. But when I got to college, just my friends had seen the Dead, and they had given me tapes. So I had tapes before I saw the Dead. And then went to see them on the 4th of July and in Kansas City, and that was it. Just kind of got on right then. Was able to see, that was in 1990. I was able to see Jerry about 25 times, and that was it. I'm not one to, really hedge on the music. If I find something I like, I'll get into it pretty hardcore. So,
What other bands are you into at that level of the Grateful Dead, or even approaching it?
oh, probably Dylan. So after Jerry died, I didn't do the follow the fish trip. I followed Dylan around, and he had some great bands there in the late 90s, and with Larry Campbell and Charlie Sexton, and just some amazing stuff. So probably Dylan.
Does Dylan's, I don't know, it's kind of morbid to call it a final act, but does his whatever he's doing now appeal to you?
Yeah, I think he's great. I saw 2 shows last year, and the first show was amazing, and the second show was kind of blah. but that's been him the whole time. You might catch an incredible show that you're like, wow, and then the next show might just not be there. So that's just how it is. But yeah, he's still doing stuff and seems to be great.
What distinguished the good show from the bad show?
Really his mood. If he's into it, then it's good. There was a time in the early 2000s where if he was if he was even making a move, you knew he was on. But it wasn't a move like, sometimes you'd say Jerry was doing cartwheels up there, but he'd just like flinch and it was incredible. So I don't know. They had some really good jams. After he did that tour with the Dead, he just kind of started jamming.
Cool, Matt. Right on. Well, thank you. You have 2 songs to make up 3 years. Plenty of time to make your comeback. But yeah, let's hear his next pick.
This lazy summer.
That was not a tape. That was a soundboard of Eyes of the World at Maples Pavilion in Palo Alto on February 9th, 1973. Rick.
Eyes is probably maybe not my favorite song, but top 3. But my least favorite lyrically. I'm no hippie by any stretch. Someone was saying earlier, I'm a punk rocker, blues guy, I think, at heart. I love the Dead. Never been a Fish fan, not even really a jam band fan. But I've always just loved that song, and that's the first ever version, right? I think that's why I picked it. It's kind of a gimme. It's a relatively easy pick, that one, but I like that because that was the first one they ever played, and they nailed it. That thing is beautiful. 73 tapes were few and far between. There were good boards that were being traded amongst the heavy hitters of the tape trading world, which was not me. So a lot of the tapes that we got were, multi-generation, multi-gen, sort of hissy, didn't sound that great. But for whatever reason, that tape I got that in 87. It was just a crystal clear 73 board. Sounded great. Wavy Gravy's on there. Like, it's just stellar. So that version's always very much stuck with me, and to think that they could, pull off perfection and didn't really change it up. Eyes stayed much the same throughout. They changed the tempo, things of that nature, but those 73 versions are some of my favorite. Just very jazzy, free flowing. Garcia's having fun. I probably said fun a lot, too much this episode, I'm sorry. They're playing so strongly and has such a confidence at that time. And it's just a joy to hear.
But the Eyes lyrics don't do it for you.
No, I love Hunter. I think he's amazing. But like I said, just that kind of the whole sentiment. I get it. It's okay. Kind of embarrassing to me as a punk rocker a little bit. sort of the epitome of what punks didn't like about the Grateful Dead, maybe. But that's just my taste. And there's so many other lyrics that are much, much better, much deeper. But I can overlook my, what's the word, dislike of the set of lyrics for the musical feel of the piece.
So Matt got exactly 73. Adam gets 74. Yeah, nice pull, Matt. Do you recognize it was the First Eyes?
I recognized it was a pretty early one. It seemed like they were just kind of taking their time on it, and it had kind of that little woody sound that 73 does, and not that I can't really tell between that and the wall of sound, but yeah, it just sounded like they were taking their time on it.
And Adam 74. So you thought it was a Wall Eyes.
Yeah, definitely knew it was like 73, 74, one drummer. The sound was a little crisper. Typically, 73s are a little thinner in the sound, so I thought the overall sound sounded a little more 74-like. And then when I heard Jerry's vocal come in, I had that like clipped microphone sound with the wall microphones, which I guess could have been 73 too. But yeah, it just sounded a little clearer. But that long intro, that was a good call, Matt. Good pull on that with the languid sort of entry.
Languid entry. Love that. Adam, how'd you get into the Dead?
So I guess a little bit similar to Cory. I heard about the Dead from my parents, but they weren't Deadheads. My dad did go to a pretty epic show. He moved to Berkeley after college in the 70s, and I think saw them in like 72. My dad got me into a lot of great music, but never really got on the bus as a Deadhead. And I was 13 when Jerry died, so a little before my concert starting career, but pretty quickly, I think my second concert was like the other ones at Continental Airlines Arena in New Jersey in 98. So that was a good like entry to the scene. It was the pretty full on parking lot shakedown. But the music was like a little like missing. I was like, this doesn't sound like Jerry's missing kind of thing. The next year though, I saw Phil 99 with Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes, and that was a double bill with Bob Dylan, actually with Larry Campbell, and that whole show was smoked. And I was like, really, really into it. And went on to see Phil a lot, probably like 20 plus times seeing Phil, seeing all the other incarnations. So I did a tally at some point a few years ago. I probably saw 50 plus, shows of different members of the Dead. But I got into the Dead through like recordings. So my dad actually later on got me Skeletons from the Closet, was pretty hooked right away. I had been into like harder stuff like grunge, but got into the albums like American Beauty, Working Man's, Terrapin. I got the studio recorded album of Terrapin, and then started learning about tapes. And one of my friend's brothers had some tapes, so I got like Cornell 77, Great American Music Hall 75, and 82 Spectrum show, April 82. That was total smoker. So this was like the early days of the internet. So I would just like email random tapers or people who had tape collections, and you could do something called blanks and postage, where you just put your blank Maxell XL2s in the mail with the padded envelope with your postage and address on it. So it's just like a really cool way to interact with the community. Yeah, so many years later, many shows later, I mean, our archive came along, some time after that. So I had, different periods, being super into the Dead, getting into other types of music. Probably had like 3 or 4 very heavy, like, on archive, listening to different eras, getting into, 80s and 90s, and Jerry Garcia band too, right? Have had some pretty deep JGB periods. So yeah, been part of my life since I got into it when I was 14, 15 or something.
Would you ever go back and listen to the other ones shows that radicalized you?
It's so funny that you say that. So I'd been in and out, right, and like Fare Thee Well, which was gets big period for getting a lot of people back into the Dead. I was kind of like more into indie at the time and hip hop and getting into other kinds of music. It was on my radar. I knew friends who were going, but I wasn't like going to make the trip. started getting into some podcasts over COVID, and my interests of like indie and those types of things started to fuse. And Dead and Co. I had heard earlier. Dead and Co. I went to one concert earlier, and it was kind of like very slow, and I wasn't so into it. But in 2019, before the pandemic, I went again, and I think they had changed they had really like clicked, and I really enjoyed it, and was like, I'll go to this the next time it comes around. So I got pretty into Dead and Co. Like, later years, like 21 through 23, I guess. And I started to listen to some of those shows. I had never really gone back to listen to any of the, like other ones or Phil shows, but that made me go into archive and start to listen to some of the shows I went to, in particular, some of those Phil shows, like that 99 Phil show, a couple of the other Phil shows that really like stood out over my show going career. And it was like, wow, these are great. And the other ones, not as much, but like I listened to some further shows that kind of like held up in a different way than I had expected. And it was sort of Dead and Co. that got me into that thought of listening to post Jerry Dead. I still probably, 85+% or more listen to the Dead with Jerry. But yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, so there's one track left. Adam has 5, Matt has 7. Before we hear Rick's last pick, Rick, how did you get into the Dead?
I knew you were going to ask me this question. I had to think back to this time called the 80s. I grew up on a reservation, and we're not far, we're not isolated by any means. Actually, it's where Robbie Robertson's from. Some people may know Robbie Robertson's Mohawk, and his mom grew up 5 minutes from where I'm sitting now. Rick Danko was from not too far from here. The inside photo of Music from Big Pink, the big group shot, that was taken at a farm about a half an hour from where I am right now, too. So music has always been around, even though we're not, an urban space. And a lot of country, a lot of bluegrass is popular around here, a lot of Southern rock. So back when I first started hanging out with the big boys, my friend's older brothers, we were 14, 15, thereabouts, a lot of Allman Brothers, a lot of Skinnerd, that kind of thing. So I was all kind of a Grateful Dead adjacent as a young person, starting to party and get into music in a big way. But I also was into, like I was saying earlier, heavy metal and then punk. And then not long after that, the Dead played in Niagara Falls, New York, at the Convention Center, which isn't far from here. But I was too young and didn't really wasn't connected to get there. It was April of '84. But I knew a few people who went, and then that summer they played in Toronto, just outside of Toronto, and the Siva benefit on June 21st, '84. Some more of my friends went. Well, people I kind of knew peripherally, but I can't remember. I had a job, I couldn't go. And then this is a long, convoluted story, Mike. Sorry, but you asked, so this is what happened, right? We all have our ways to get there. So my cousin at the time was going to university in Toronto, and one of our professors there was a guy by the name of Rob Bowman. If you're he's written liner notes. He's won Grammys for liner notes for Stax, the record label Stax. He's a big Bob Dylan guy. He's a big band guy, historian, writes liner notes and stuff. He's a professor there. So one of his, he was teaching musicology and popular music back, in the 80s when it wasn't really a thing, but it was a popular course at the university. And one of the, I don't know if it was an assignment, but one of the field trips he would take his students was to whatever Grateful Dead concert was in the vicinity that semester. So in the fall of '84, the Syracuse show was part of the field trip that he offered to get tickets for his students, or they had the option to do that, right? And so my cousin was in the class and a couple of her friends. So they said, hey, do you want to go see the Grateful Dead in Syracuse? And at that time, I just started this radio and television program I told you about at a different place, different college. And the teachers went on strike, so I had time on my hands. It was a Saturday night anyway. So I said, sure, myself and my other cousin. Yeah, we'll go. Why not? I didn't have a car that would make it, so I borrowed my dad's pickup truck. And this is like in the 80s when pickup trucks were like pickup trucks, man. They were like farm trucks, and they were uncomfortable and rattly. And designed to, they weren't comfort mobiles at all. And there was literally, so there we are on the way to Syracuse, no tickets. And we didn't realize until we were halfway there that we don't have a plan. Like, we're going to meet our friends in Syracuse at this big place. We have no idea where it is. We have no idea where to where to meet them. Didn't have cell phones, didn't have GPS. What are we doing? Anyway, so we're going to New York State Thruway. There's literally straw and hay flying out the back as we're going 60 miles an hour in this pickup truck down to Syracuse. And but of course, as you get closer, if you remember this back in the touring days, as you get closer, you see more and more people going, right? Steal your face stickers, out of state plates, all that kind of thing. This is weird. Like, where are all these people coming from? Where are they going? I knew where they're going. We pulled off the thruway in Syracuse, got the Syracuse exit, and they had these little things printed at the toll booths there, directions to the Syracuse Carrier Dome, just for people like us. No GPS, no idea where we're going. So I don't know, that was helpful. That's how we just took directions at this little, sheet of paper that they gave to us. I don't even know how they knew we were going. It's the magic of Jerry, I guess. He sent us directions. So we find our place there. We pull a pickup truck into this parking lot outside. It's at the university, right? Syracuse University. And so we pull the truck in this parking lot. It's wild. It's wild. This is back in the day. The parking lot, it was a Saturday night. It was a beautiful fall day. And right beside us pulls in this microbus, of course, from Florida. And out jumps like 6 of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen in my life up to that point. And it's like, what? Okay, I'm in. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm in. Like, this, people are, there's bubbles floating around, pot is wafting everywhere. Just a nice, mellow, big fall festival party. Music is playing in this, out of the trunks of people's cars. It was just a thing. Never seen it before. And like I said, nobody knew what the Grateful Dead was, really. There was no media coverage, under the radar, very few cops, just a really good time. And so anyway, we sort of come to our senses a little bit and realize, okay, now what do we do? How are we going to find, our tickets? And just as at that moment, we look up and they just happen to be walking by. And this crowd of 30,000 people, my friends who had the tickets, just happened to be sauntering by our location where we had parked, completely by whatever, the magic of the Grateful Dead. And then just, oh, hey, there they are. It was just like, it was meant to be. And then so we had a fantastic time. Really didn't know what to expect. Of course, I was, consider myself, a blues guy or a metal guy. I was dressed all in black. I remember having George Thorogood and the Destroyers black T-shirt on and black jeans, and thought I was cool going to this very vibrant place. I felt all self-conscious, But people were, amazing, wonderful. It was fun. So we were sitting straight back from the stage, and I was sharing this with Mike a little bit when we talked. And so if you know anything about James Anderson, he's been photographing the dead since the 70s. And he has a little website, and he sells all these great, great concert shots. And one of them is from my first show at Syracuse Carrier Dome, and it's from the exact vantage point of where I was sitting, where we were sitting that night, straight away. And I said, boy, I talked to him just recently because I want to get a print of that made. And I said, I was sitting probably, 3 or 4 rows behind where he took that photo. So all these sort of things are kind of synchronous, right? Like, so to have that print hanging on my walls, like, that takes me back to my first show, because it was a turning point in my life, right? I've listened to Grateful Dead every day since then. So yeah, kind of a circuitous road, I suppose. But yeah, I was in.
You serve on the board of the Six Nations Cultural and Educational Institution. What is your mission?
Several things, I guess. That's sort of my infatuation with New York State. That's our homeland, where we sided with the British in the American Revolution as allies that predate, the formation of America. And so we were exiled from our traditional territories in New York State and moved here into Southern Ontario in 1784. So part of our mission, I guess, and we heavily influenced the American Constitution as Haudenosaunee or Iroquois people. So I guess part of our larger mission is to revitalize our languages, to tell these historical stories and relationships, political relationships, And I would go so far. I did give a paper at the Studies Association about this several years ago about in terms of the Grateful Dead being attracted to power places, like places of power. They always return to New York State a lot. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, Glens Falls, Utica. And I argue that, that's kind of, places like Stonehenge. We have stories about our oral traditions that talk about the significance of these places as sacred sites, I guess you could call them. And then, others would say that, well, and I get it. Others would say that, no, the Dead played these places in New York State out of economics, right? Like there was colleges and universities in these places, and there was a built-in fan base that's we returned to again and again and again. And sure, I mean, that's probably quite possible. But I'd also argue that, I think maybe the Dead enjoyed playing these places a lot. They felt that they played well. If you just sort of do a survey of the official releases between Dave's Picks and Dick's Picks, there's a lot of Syracuse, Rochester, Binghamton, probably an inordinate amount of upstate New York shows compared to all the other places that they played. So I think there's a bit of a connection between geography and place affecting the music.
Thank you, Rick. Matt has 7. Adam has 5. Let's hear Rick's next pick. Slipknot at the Cap Center in Landover, Maryland on October 10th, 1994. That was taped by Tim Wiley. Rick, can you tell us about that Slipknot?
That shows, I think, kind of the last great weekend my friends and I had. We had many, but I mean, just as far as our touring days go, my buddies had like second or third row seats, really, really good seats through the mail order. And like I said earlier, I was stuck in the taping section. So for that night, my buddy Tom said, hey, how about our seats are good. How about, get started, get things rolling, and then I'll come back and get you. We'll swap tickets and you come up front. I said, sure. So that's what we did. So that's about the time, because that was the start of the second set, started with Help Slip Franklin. And so, once it got going through Help on the Way, and then so I go up right to the front, like third or fourth row, like I said. And I just remember, being, that was the last time I was that close to the band. Never really got close anyway, but it's again etched on my memory. It's like the lights, they look good, they look happy, they sounded powerful from that, being that close. And it was a good feeling because there were some lean years in there and some lean shows. And, you can hear Garcia stumble a little bit because his atrophy wasn't, he wasn't on his game, but he was trying, and it just had good energy, great set list. They played, after that, Estimated Terrapin. So it was just a memory of me, or a memory for me of that weekend, just having one of our last sort of great Grateful Dead weekends.
It was a great pick. Matt guessed 91. Adam guessed 89. So it's a tie. Matt, you were closer, 91.
I knew it was 90s. I was just listening real hard to see if Bruce was there, and I thought I heard some piano in there, and then I thought I heard a little bit of Vince flourish, and so I just kind of went for it. I saw a great show at Deer Creek, probably the last really great show in '94. They did a playing in the second half that was just mind melting, just amazing. So there's some good shows in there.
Way to go, Matt. Way to stay alive. Adam, 89. Tell us.
Yeah, so my mind was going to, I think they like busted out I got Slipknot and thought that was like a late 80s bust out or something from maybe some 89 shows. So I heard the synthy keys and probably should have keyed into that being Vince versus Brent, but Jerry's, like the gain on Jerry's guitar just kind of reminded me a little bit late 80s. So yeah.
Right on. Well, it's great news for us. We get another bonus track from Rick. Let's hear it. Morning Dew at Rich Stadium in Orchard Park, New York on July 4th,
Bills.
1989. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Anything beyond the Bills, or is it just a straight Bills shout out with that Morning Dew?
Rich Stadium is being torn down after this season. So it's a kind of a farewell to Rich Stadium. They'd played there 5 times, 86, 89, 90, 92 and 93. So 4 or 5. That's a pretty famous show. That's the one from Trucking Up to Buffalo. That's an audience tape. That's why it sounds a little bit wonky. It's always hard to capture good sound in a stadium. That's, I think, maybe my only tape that didn't turn out for whatever reason. We had technical problems we didn't know at the time, so we didn't know what was going on. I never did figure it out, but that tape didn't turn out. So yeah, it was July 4th. Obviously, the 10,000 Maniacs opened. I had a crush on Natalie Merchant, and 10,000 Maniacs are amazing. They opened. I think it's the only time they opened for the Dead, and because they're from Jamestown, New York, not far from Buffalo. And I also remember that show because I went with 2 friends, a couple of my punk rock buddies who were open-minded and wanted to check out the Dead, because by this time, of course, everybody had heard about them, right? So I was with them and hung out with them. Great time, and we got there early to see 10,000 Maniacs, so we had a great spot, maybe 30, 40 feet from the stage, and just stayed there and let my buddy run the decks that night. Enjoyed the show, but again, I had a hard time at stadiums. still do for shows, you know, because you're too distant. It's just too much going on to get distracted. I like amphitheaters and arenas, but you know, realities dictated that the Dead had to play there they were so popular. But they made the most of that night. I always admired their ability. You know, I saw shows at Giant Stadium as well, and Jerry would play "To Lay Me Down." You know, he wouldn't care, right? Like the quietest of songs in the biggest of places. It's all a stage. A stage is a stage to them. That took a lot of a lot of guts, a lot of confidence. I didn't realize that show was so good until they released the DVD, the Trucking Up to Buffalo, and yeah, that's why.
Yeah, and that was taped by Dan Tepper. Adam got it exactly 89. Matt guessed 87. Congrats, Adam. Taken to the brink by Matt, but you clawed your way back with a nice 89 poll. 2 89 guesses in a row. The second one dead on. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I had to really second guess myself there on the 89. Also, there was something about Jerry's tone that was like drawing me to like 90s, like 93. Somebody, maybe Steve, had that like the acoustic pickup thing, and then I heard some organ, and then as the swell kind of like, you know, it was unmistakably the B3, and I was like, well, it's got to be Brent, and so went with went between like 87, 90, and was like, I'm just going to go 89 again, even though I just guessed it. So
Congrats, Adam. There's some guess year psychology at work because I knew you were going to guess 89 again. It's very common for people when they're wrong to guess the same year again. I don't know why.
I had to override it, and I almost guessed 93, so got lucky.
There you go. Matt, 87, reasonable guess. Tell us.
It sounded like a stadium show and just a big venue, and it was kind of a toss-up for me at that point, late 80s, with Brent playing. Nice win, Adam. Good job. So, yeah, that was it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Adam.
Can I do a shout-out?
Yeah, hit it, Matt.
I want to shout out some local Kansas City dead bands, KC Bones, Play Dead, Shakedown Strings, and Grateful Fish Heads. And the venue is Mike Kelly's West Sider. Great place. Good little scene.
Nice. Thank you, Matt. And Adam, congrats again.
Yeah, thanks. I got to give a shout out to my good friend and coworker, Greg, who is a big Deadhead and went to a lot of shows in the 90s and curated a practice Guest of the Year round for me. Which was super helpful.
What was the biggest curveball he threw at you?
He got me on a 88 that had harmonica, and it was John Popper on the harmonica, which was an audience recording and a tough one.
Hey, you swing with the baseball bat with the donut on, and then when you go step up to the plate, you're ready to go.
He got me ready to go.
That's awesome, Adam. Thanks so much. And thank you, Rick, for the lovely picks and even better commentary. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks a lot so much.
Thanks so much for listening. For all the show links, including Rick's book, check out the show notes. If you want to be contestant on the show, sponsor the show, or make comments and ask questions, email us at info@guesttheyear.net. Shout out to Dylan, James, and Jack for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made the show possible. Congratulations to Adam for winning and moving on to next week. And to other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it's all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night. Good night. Good night. And I bid you good night. Good night. Good night.